Well, some guests have just arrived in our garden from California. In fact, they're sitting here in our patch of broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, and I want to introduce you to them. They're lady beetles. The lady beetles are a beneficial insect. They will feed on aphids. They love aphids and any other soft-bodied insects. They're also very good for controlling asparagus beetle larvae if you've had trouble with asparagus beetles in your asparagus patch. Now when they arrive, they'll usually come shipped in a box, and it will say live ladybugs. In fact, I've already released a few. You can see them crawling around on the outside of the box there. But when they arrive, they'll be in a cloth sack, and in the sack there'll be some excelsior paper in there, or fiber, and it'll be moist, so they'll have a little drink on the way, but they will be thirsty. And so you need to let them loose in the garden in the morning when the plants are rather dewy, or in the evening. And if the plants don't have moisture, have a sprinkling can handy to wet down the foliage. Now it's starting to rain here, so I'm not going to put any more water on our garden. Just going to take a few out. You can use lady beetles on ornamentals and on vegetables and on fruit, any place where you've had trouble with aphids or other soft-bodied insects. I'm just going to take out a little bit of the excelsior. Now, if lady beetles arrive and the weather is not good outside, you can just keep them in your refrigerator for up to 2 weeks and they'll be just fine. And if you have some shrubs where you've had trouble with aphids, you can put about 1 tablespoon on per shrub. This is a pint sack here, and it's enough to treat an area that's about 30 by 50 in a garden. I'm just going to release a few here. We don't want all of them in the garden at one time. If you've had trouble with aphids on fruit trees, I have trouble with aphids on my apple trees, and lady beetles will clean up that problem. Now it helps if you put them out in the garden when you already have foliage and at a time when the plants are already starting to get a few aphids on them, because the lady beetles are hungry, they need something to feed on right away, and if there's not a food source there, they'll leave. And that's where we come to the topic of keeping a balance in the garden. Even though we don't like pests in our garden, you have to have a few there to have food for your beneficial insects to keep everything in balance. Now when you order lady beetles or other beneficial insects in the mail, they will come with a set of instructions. It will tell you how to take care of them. And usually they'll give you a pretty good rundown on how large an area you can treat with the beneficial insects. But I think it's a method you might want to try. We've mentioned a time or two this spring in the garden about getting your children interested in gardening. This would be a great way to do it. It also, if you're a Girl Scout leader or a 4-H leader, this would be a good project in the garden. Now I want to introduce you to a few other beneficial insects that we'll be releasing in our garden. In these 2 little capsules, I have a little square of paper that looks like a piece of sandpaper, but on it are thousands of eggs of a beneficial wasp called the Trichogramma wasp. And 5 of these wasps could sit on the head of the pin. They're that tiny. But the way they're beneficial is that they parasitize the larvae of caterpillars. And there are certain species of beneficial wasps that are beneficial in the orchard and on ornamental plants. There are other species that are good in the vegetable garden. And these will usually come shipped on a piece of paper like this, and as soon as you start seeing the little wasps hatching out in this container and moving around, then that's the time to staple this to a stake in the garden or place it in the crotch of a fruit tree, and they'll be released in the garden and again help maintain a balance there. Now, there are 2 species that I have here. One is for vegetables and corn plants, and the other one is for fruit trees. And I'm going to wait a few days until they hatch out before I release them. And there's another critter that we can invite to the garden that usually when you hear the name of it, you get upset, and that's nematodes. And nematodes in the garden, the harmful ones that we're familiar with, one is the root knot nematode, and that's what causes the roots of our beans, carrots, tomatoes, and okra to be very knotty. When you pick up the plant that's not been thriving in the garden, it looks dwarf and growing poorly, and you pick it up from the soil and dig it up and the roots are all damaged, that's caused by root knot nematode. But there are also beneficial nematodes in the garden. Now if you had trouble with cutworms or wireworms in the soil, or if you've had trouble with cabbage root maggots, any of those pests do have a predator in the garden, and that's a beneficial form of nematodes. And this is something else that you can send off for in catalogs, have shipped to your house, and when it arrives, it looks like a dirty sponge, but it's not. On here is a moist solution that contains thousands of immature beneficial nematodes. What you do is put it in a container and take some lukewarm water and pour that over the sponge. And that helps rinse out these small microscopic animals, and you just squeeze that out into the water to release them from the sponge. You do that several times. Pour a little more water over it. And usually what you do is mix up about a pint's worth of water, and then you put it in a sprayer and sprinkle that over your soil. And they'll be poured into the soil and immediately start foraging for some of these soil pests. It's also a good idea to rinse out the sack because you have many thousands left in there in this solution. So just rinse that out, then pour that in there, and then you can put that in a sprayer or a sprinkling can and sprinkle it on the garden. Now these immature nematodes parasitize the harmful animals in the garden, or harmful insects such as the cutworms and the cabbage root maggots and wireworms. So it's something you really might want to try if you've had trouble with these pests and do not want to use pesticides. Now one last pest is the lacewing. Now lacewings are beneficial insects. Don't confuse them with lace bugs that feed on azaleas and eggplant. We've shown you those before in the garden. Lace bugs are a sucking pest and they're harmful to plants. Lacewings, however, are a different insect, and they feed on harmful insects in the garden, such as aphids. You may also have seen their eggs and not known what they are. They're a tiny hair-like projection that's stuck to a leaf, and at the tip of it is a tiny pure white egg, about smaller than the size of the head of a pin. If you've seen those in the garden, leave them on your plants. They'll hatch into lacewings. These are beautiful beneficial insects, and they're very, very helpful in the garden. One last point, if you're using beneficial insects or beneficial nematodes, none of these are harmful to people or to pets or to your plants. They do not eat plants, they only eat other insects. So try them in your garden. Like I said before, you won't see dramatic results right away, but you will have a garden that's in balance and hopefully have fewer harmful pests in your garden this season.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.